Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Akio, and if you're looking for effective product teams and how to get there from a technical side or from a business side, then this episode is for you. My guest Chiedza Muguti is currently product leader and chief product officer at Altios, learning how to roller skate and originally from Zimbabwe. I really loved this conversation with her and I had a lot of learnings. I'll put all her socials in the description below. Check her out. And with that being said, enjoy the episode.
Beyond coding.
When it comes to your role right now, could you tell us a little bit on how you got there when it comes to product ownership and product vision and stuff like that?
Yes. So where do you want me to start from, like the beginning, or just really specifically this role?
Oh, you can start from the beginning. That's fine.
Okay, cool. So I started as a business analyst. I was working in a delivery team very closely with my favorite people, engineers and architects and QAs.
Yeah.
But when I started, I was working in a more waterfall model. So, really writing very detailed requirements upfront. But anyway, to cut a long story short, I moved from being a business, because this story is very long. It's trying to compress 15 years into 10 seconds. But yeah, so I moved from being a business analyst, and then over time, moved into more of a product owner role, and then moved into more product management type work, and then now obviously working in product leadership for the last few years. So I always tell people that I spent a lot of time, like, in the trenches doing very detailed work,
Yeah.
working with engineers. So really understanding the whole implementation and delivery cycle, how that works, what they need, the kind of challenges that they face when we are translating sort of business commercial requirements into things that technical teams can work on. So that's also really helped me in terms of moving into leadership, because I have a very holistic understanding of sort of how things come together.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. When you say product leadership, what do I envision there then? Are you responsible for, like, on a managerial level of the product owners, or are you more of a business owner of a group of products? How does that work?
Yeah, good question. So I think it depends on the organization, but the companies where I've been in product leadership, it's actually being responsible for, because they are smaller companies, so being responsible for a number of different, whether you want to call them domains or product lines. So being responsible for all the delivery around it, all of the discovery work that goes around it, and really taking the company mission and vision, translating that into what do we need to do from a product perspective to achieve our goals on an organizational level.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the most important part is the people part. So, growing people, recruiting people, and obviously retaining people. So, how do you make sure that people are feeling happy and challenged and they've got a good balance in their roles? And then a lot of also product leadership work involves processes, because the product touches so many different parts of the organization. So, you actually have a lot of influence over the processes, because product teams need this and that, whether it's from legal, from compliance, from
Yeah.
sales, from marketing. So it's really important to have a really good handle on the processes to make the whole product lifecycle as efficient and as fun as possible. It's not just about efficiency, but it's also about everybody having fun.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine that. But then the position you're in, right? If a company has a mission and a vision and it should translate back into the products, you're then in between the product teams that actually execute and where that mission and vision is coming from, probably like on a more managerial level. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so where I'm at right now is I'm in the leadership team.
Yeah.
And then at that level, we're talking about the mission and the vision. And then my role is to say, okay, what does the product strategy look like
Yeah.
to actually make sure that we can achieve those goals? So, how does the product team contribute to our mission and our vision? So, that's what I'm responsible for. So, I want to make sure it goes from the senior leadership team into the team directly. So,
Yeah.
it's my job to make sure that there's a lot of back and forth going on, and it's not just me, right? So products are done by a group of people. So making sure that it's not that I'm the bottleneck, that I'm the only person who's speaking to the senior leadership team about our product strategy, but that everybody is actually empowered to do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I love hearing that. But that's to me Sounds like a very difficult task. Like, what are some of the biggest challenges there in translating that to work that a product team can do or can kind of take and refine?
I think that from my perspective, what makes it difficult is because of my background. So, as I explained before, a lot of my work is very detailed. So, I think I tend to have a fear of, like, the really big and exciting sort of mission and vision that's super, super aspirational, because a
Yeah.
lot of my thinking is really rooted in reality. And I'm thinking about, like, okay, but this could happen and this could happen. And what about this sort of product that we have, and how are we going to make all of this happen? So I think for me, what I always have to do is just allow myself to feel comfortable in the uncomfortable and in the unknown. And
Yeah.
this for me is the hardest part when it comes to especially being in a sort of leadership position, because you really have to speak at that mission vision level
Yeah.
and then really empower the team to work on the strategy. So I do have to be a lot more aspirational, kind of saying, yeah, we're going to shoot for this really high thing, and try and quieten down that super pragmatic, technical voice that I have inside that's like, oh my gosh, how are we going to handle this? How's this going to happen? And everything. So for me, this is probably personally, this is the biggest challenge for me.
Yeah, man, that sounds super recognizable because I'm a very pragmatic person as well. So being on a more like, I would say longer term horizon, I guess, and trying to inspire people is something that's challenging for me as well. But you
Yeah,
mentioned something specifically in being comfortable in uncomfortable situations. I actually did a talk about this, like a 5 minute talk, and I'll send you the recording after this when I have it. But
yeah.
how do you deal with that? How do you get comfortable when it's kind of an uncomfortable situation for you?
So I think for me, from quite from quite a young age, I've always been a very expressive person. So someone who, you know, really sort of shows how they feel. I don't necessarily verbalize it, but I definitely show it. So whether it's in my face or my body language, but you can really tell, okay, something's not quite right. And I used to be very feisty. Okay,
Mm.
not used to be, I'm still feisty, but I used to be like very, very fiery, I would say. And
Okay.
then sort of over time, I learned how to manage that, right? So for me, what's more comfortable is being super expressive and
Mm.
being quite fiery and feisty. But when you're thinking about the context of the workplace,
Yeah.
this doesn't quite land, especially if I think about, cultural differences. So I'm from Zimbabwe, and we are very expressive, whether it's our face, our voices, the way we're speaking. Sometimes people might think we're fighting or we're arguing, but we're just having a very animated conversation. So I would say from early on in my career, because I then was working in the UK, is I mastered the art of, I really want to express myself, but this is not the time,
Mm.
which is an uncomfortable balance, right? It's like an internal tension
Yeah.
that you have to actively manage and just be like, okay, I can do this. I can get through this meeting without showing like a crazy facial expression that's like, what are you talking about? Or why would we do this? So I think from there, that's when I've started to learn a lot about being comfortable in being uncomfortable, and just constantly telling myself that you're not going to be sitting in this situation forever,
Yeah.
right? Everything comes to pass, like literally everything comes to pass. And this has also helped getting older. I'm turning 40 in December.
Mm.
So, it's also helped with age, where things that seemed like the end of the world for me when I was like 25, now, at 39/40, I'm like, oh yeah, it's fine. No,
Not such a big deal.
keep calm, everybody. It's all fine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to keep saying this probably, but I recognize in myself that I'm very expressive. Me and my girlfriend sometimes look at me. I'm very animated on this podcast, and she's like, "You make way too many faces." And like, that's just me. Like, that's just how I look or who I am. And I mean, suppressing that or thinking of suppressing that, I think I would go insane.
Yeah,
But I do get that it can alarm people if you're like, "Hold up! Like the ship is sinking. Like, we need to do something." Yeah,
yeah,
I get that.
yeah. I think on that point, it's also about, I think when you are in a leadership position,
Mm.
it's actually really understanding that how you come across and how you communicate has such a huge effect on people.
Yeah.
So if you are super animated, or you look super anxious, or you look super stressed, you're actually setting the tone for that team. You're setting the tone for those people.
Yeah.
And when I first became a leader, I didn't really realize like how my emotions and my emotional expression really had such a huge effect on other people. So it's also over time learning that, I mean, I'm not talking about being so clinical that I don't show any emotion, but just being aware of, hey, actually, I am going to really affect people, and trying to really think about that a lot more as that's happened over time.
Yeah, interesting. When was that realization? Because it must have happened a bunch of times, and you would have seen the effect of it before you would realize, okay, this is basically when I need to tone it down or think about how I act, because you know then the repercussions.
Yeah, I had a meeting once, and it was a team, and I cried in the meeting because I was really
No way.
sort of stressed about something, and I just burst into tears in that meeting. And I could see that they didn't know what to do, right?
Mm.
So they were just looking at me like, okay, what do we do? Do we comfort her? Do we, like, what do we do? And
Yeah.
it was a very uncomfortable situation. And I think I was so in my emotions that it took me a while to realize that, oh, actually, do you know what? This is not the right place. And I need to kind of step back. I need to take time out for myself and really calm down. So I said, okay, I need to step out the room, and, you can all finish the meeting. And then, if I don't come back in time, we can just wrap up. And I just sat in the bathroom. And for me, it was like, because I'm also someone who really picks up a lot on people's emotions.
Yeah.
So I really sensed that tension in the room, the discomfort, and almost like that, when you want to run away when something is happening, like I think some of them wanted to leave the room, but
Yeah.
just were like, okay, she's our boss, and like, can we actually just walk out on her? But this is super weird and awkward. So I think, I really sort of sat with myself after that and spoke to my manager, and also spoke to a friend of mine. And, to my manager's credit, he was really great, because he asked me, how did it even happen? How did it even get to the point that you started crying? And I was like, oh no, I was just like really emotional. And he's like, yeah, but there must have been things that had been happening, or things that were piling up. And then that's how you had that outburst. So actually, it's about managing those pre events
Mm.
rather than tackling that, like, oh, you cried. But it's like, no, how did you actually get to that point? And then he really made me very conscious about that, that gradual, like, I'm upset, I'm upset, I'm upset. I'm actually not really upset. So he really taught me a lot about, like, really recognizing that this is happening,
Yeah.
and not letting it be like this subconscious program that's just running, and then all of a sudden it's like a volcano. Someone I know very well, very famously, called me an absorber.
Okay.
Like, she just absorbs for weeks, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden it's like a volcano. So yeah, yeah.
I love that example. Yeah, for sure. Man, I lost my train of thought there. I want to zoom in on, because you and me spoke before the show, and you
Yeah.
mentioned you love when a team is really collaborating, right? When it's a smooth operation, when it's effective in what it's doing, but a team doesn't get to that point automatically. It needs to go through a lot of rigor and figuring things out, figuring out how you should align and how you should work before you can get to that point. What have you seen that makes a team really effective in either your leadership position that you are in now, or maybe from a product owner perspective that you had before?
I think the biggest epiphany that I had is that my sincere belief is that most of the time when a team is not working well together,
Mm.
it's because they've got a very different understanding of where we're trying to go. And that rests with the leader, that rests with the person who is supposed to be leading, whether it's that team or that department, to make it very, very clear this is where we're going, so that we're all pulling in the same direction. Because my fundamental belief is that people want to do a good job, and people want to work together. But I think the one thing that we need to do a lot more is like that, that really intentional relationship building, that really intentional, Patrick, I want to understand you as a person,
Yeah.
not like I want to know like everything about you, but I want to understand what makes you tick, what do you like, what don't you like, and, what are the different ways that you receive information? Because, it could be that someone says something, I could say something that I think is hilarious and someone takes offense. So actually really understanding those nuances in how we communicate with each other and how we come across. I think especially now in a world where people have a hybrid way of working, which I think is amazing. But some people are in the office together, some people are remote, some people are fully remote. So you have to think about how can you actually make that intentional relationship building happen. When people talk about meeting at the ice water machine where you can just get, not ice water, but the water machine
Yeah.
where you get water and you just start chatting with someone. One of my closest friends, I met her at the printer at my first job.
Love that.
We just started chatting. She was in marketing, I was working in like the product team, and we got chatting, and she was always my in. Whenever we had a bottleneck with marketing, my girl was on top of things. But it's because we had built that relationship, but it started at the printer. So for me, I always see that teams, I think, fundamentally want to work together, but it's just about understanding what does success actually look like? How are we going to be judged to be successful as a team? And do we all understand that at the same level? And are we reinforcing that? And how are we intentionally trying to build relationships to know each other?
Yeah. Who from your perspective should drive that? Like, should that come from the team in and of its own? Or should a product owner drive that, or a scrum master? Like, where should that come from? Because I fully understand what you're saying, and I'm recognizing it within my own team, especially now that we're remote. Those printer conversations, the coffee conversations, they don't happen. So we more actively have to work on team building. And it gets even harder when you have a big team.
Yeah, yeah. I think I mean the temptation is to say it should come from leadership. I mean, there's, there should be something, but I definitely think that everybody has a role that they can play. So, for me, I know that, early on in my career, I was always so enthusiastic about trying to get people together, to work together, to hang out, have lunch, have a drink. So I think it can also be within the team. So I think what the leaders should do is give people the space to actually be able to share ideas like, hey, I think we can do this for team building, or hey, I think we can come together and do this activity. I think it could be fun
Yeah.
for us as a team. So I think there's one part, yes, absolutely, leaders should role model it. So I think leaders should always kind of be, and I know it's not easy, right? Kind of opening yourself up. I did this before at another role where I would put out like a schedule and just tell people like, hey, you can book 30 minutes with me for anything, whether it's work related or you just want to chat, you want to have a cup of coffee, you want to have a laugh, you can book this time with me. And I remember the first quarter, don't laugh, no one booked any time.
Oh,
And I
no.
was like, absolutely embarrassed and devastated. And then I said, oh, actually, and then the next quarter started. And then after a few days, people were like, well, where's that schedule? And I said, well, no one booked it last time. So I didn't put it
It's
out
gone.
again. I didn't want to be embarrassed. But they were like, well, actually, it's the fact that it's there is actually of a comfort. And I thought, you know what? It's no water off my back if I still put it out there, because you know what? Guess what? Even if one person books 30 minutes, that's really, really great. And then I put it out again. And then the uptake was a little bit better. But I think people were just like, oh, and then people started doing it with each other,
Yeah.
just being like, oh, let's just like have a chat. I've seen Chiedza does it. So I think that's super cool. So sometimes it also can be the leader can role model, but also should say to the team, like, if you want to do stuff, like just let me know so then I can also maybe it's providing a bit of budget or space or time, if a team say like, hey, we want a couple of hours to just chat and just give them that time.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, time is usually the issue, is what I feel, because a team comes together to fix a certain problem. There's pressure on that problem. They want to fix it as fast as possible. But then you just work as a group of individuals, right? You don't work together as a team. If I'm responsible for the back end and there's a lot of back end work, then I'm going to feel a lot of pressure to finish that. Instead of it being a team responsibility, I'm going to feel like it's my responsibility. But the way that we get there is to actually take time for team building. and that needs to come from somewhere. So if there are a lot of like strict deadlines, how would you still advise taking that time, or should it just be facilitated through leadership in that way? What are your thoughts?
I think that when we think about planning, I think it's just an age-old problem in software development.
Yeah.
It's just overcommitment, overcommitment. Because what you don't want to do is commit people to the point of you're almost committing at like 120%, right?
Mm.
So people don't even have a moment to breathe, and then there's just this angst everywhere, right? When people are like, "Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Have you merged it yet? Is it tested yet? Has the is, and I always say to teams like actually let's just come together, what is realistically possible, and then okay, we should be ambitious, but actually let's also have this rooted in reality. If we're having delivery problems now, if there are things that are late now, there's no point the next time over committing again.
Yeah.
So there's something fundamental that we need to sort out so that we can commit and say, okay, we're good. And then once we're good and we feel safe, and also a lot of that comes down to safety, right? People are also afraid to be ambitious because they are afraid that, oh my gosh, if we don't make it, we're going to be like the example. Like everyone's going to be like, right, they didn't
Didn't make
finish.
it. Yeah.
So it's really thinking about, and I think this is something that comes from leadership, is that you should really look at the teams and understand like, okay, this team, how are they doing? How are they performing? And if there are problems, if things are flashing amber, I'm a really big fan of trying to deal with things when it's flashing amber rather than when it's red, because every time I've waited until a team is in the red zone, it takes out so much energy from everybody just to try to get to some sense of calmness.
Yeah.
So when things are flashing amber, what's going on there? And sometimes as a leader, you have to face up, because remember, a lot of it is that upward communication, that expectation management, and just really, be the leader, stand up and say to the leadership team, we're not going to make it.
Yeah.
We don't have the capacity. We can't do it. But this is how we are going to mitigate the situation, or this is the reason, this is the plan. I think sometimes we leave teams too much to fend for themselves, rather than as leaders just being like, hey, I put my hand up and I take responsibility for the situation that this team is in. This is how I want to remedy it. This is what I've learned from it, and this is how I want us to move forward.
Yeah, I like that. Looking forward and not too much on things that have happened, right? Because they've already happened. If you're already at that point that things are flashing red, the only thing you should do is look forward, look at your learnings, and try to do better as a team, as an organization. So I love that you're saying that. I love the term flashing amber as well, but I have a hard time trying to figure out what are kind of symptoms. What would you say is a good symptom that something is flashing amber or that you've seen?
So one symptom that I think I've seen quite a lot of the time is, for example, when teams are like, oh yeah, we don't really. Okay, so we all know about all of the different ceremonies that agile teams have, but when teams start saying like, oh yeah, we don't need a retro because nothing ever happens, then I know like, okay, something is not quite right here. And that also is actually on me, right? It's not about the team, because what the team does is they take the time to have all of these ceremonies. They put all this amazing information for leaders, whether it's on Notion or Confluence or Google Docs, whatever, and we don't read it.
Yeah.
We don't read it. We don't look at what's happening, right? So, and then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, what's happening, guys? And it's like, well, actually, we've documented this in like 6 retros, and
Exactly.
nothing ever happened. So I think also when teams are sort of disheartened, and then the other thing that I do see sometimes is, I'm okay, it's not being nosy, but when, Slack channels, or, most companies I've worked in, we use Slack. But when I pick up on people being quite short with each other on Slack, I just monitor it just to kind of see what's happening. But if it does persist and it carries on, then I'm just straight in there like, okay, is there something I need to know about? Is there something that I can support you with? Is there a reason that you are feeling this way, with this particular team/person? And then sort of trying to get in there while it's like not super rude, but it's really like you can hear the tone is like, if you don't do this, I swear,
Yeah,
this is the
and you're
last
done.
time. So like really that, and then I think another one is when when teams are talking about dependencies, like okay, I need this from you so that I can do this. And when the conversation is not constructive, then I know okay, I need to figure out like what's happening with these two teams. So normally, you know, as I'm on the product side, I kind of will take the product managers and be like, okay, you've got these dependencies, like let's talk through them, what's going on, and then sort of understanding like okay, what are the issues that are going on. So for me, these are some of the things that are flashing amber. Or when I hear things like product never do dot 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 dot, then I know like okay, what's happening.
I've never heard that one actually.
Yeah,
I'm thinking back to kind of your personal experience because I've had a lot of experience with product owners, right? From a developer perspective in a development team. And there's always, or mostly sometimes, a fight
yeah,
about responsibilities and expectations, right? If they're not on the table, we need to put them on the table as soon as possible. What do we expect of each other? In which degree? Who creates stories? Who's responsible for the technical stories? Who more for the functional stories? Like it's always a discussion, and there's slight variations in different teams. Sometimes there's the tech leader who takes a bit more responsibility and takes some weight off a product owner who then focuses more on stakeholder management and like product vision, stuff like that. But before we get into all of that, you transitioned from a business analyst position more to a product owner position. How did that transition go, and what were like the biggest learnings there? Was it like, because that's what I've seen in certain organizations, oh, we have a team of BAs, oh, you're all going to be product owners, just like that? This is kind of the way of working, figure it out. Or was it more
yeah.
gradual in your way?
I think for me, moving from business analyst to, so specifically for the type of person that I am, I'm really happy that I started out as a business analyst, right? So I could really have a good understanding, a very good grip, and also on the basis of my degree, because I did information systems. So I've already got like that strong sort of technical background,
Mm.
because I truly believe that my superpower is being able to translate things to different audiences. Because as a product person, you're trying to take something that's super technical. How do you explain like you're refactoring something for better performance to someone who's working in like a customer support team who just wants to know like why are you not resolving this outstanding customer ticket? Like just tell me in very basic terms, right? Rather than coming and being like, oh yeah, so we're moving from this server to this server, and then we need to decouple these services. Like the customer support team don't care about that. Just tell them what is the result that's going to come out of all of this really, really great, amazing hard work.
Yeah.
Um, so I think for me, moving from business analyst to product, as I started to really realize like there is such a big gap if you don't have like a business analyst, but you're solely relying on people who are like doing rather pure product roles. The gap with the technical team gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and
Mm.
quite a lot then starts to get lost in translation. And also, all of this amazing work that's happening in the discovery sort of phase of things is not actually being told to the teams that are delivering, so they can also start to prepare their thinking or their plans so that you're all in sync with each other, right? So I'm not talking about, oh, make sure the engineering is in every single discovery session, but they should have like some sort of a sense of what's coming. So I think for me, this is something that I really, really took from being a business analyst, was to try to make sure that there is some sort of awareness of what's coming, with the engineering team, and also thinking a lot about how can I be a better ally for the engineering team, right? How can I really translate into business terms all of the amazing great work, that they are doing, so that people recognize that these 2 week sprints that we take for granted where things are being delivered, it's actually a lot that goes into it. A
Yeah.
lot of thinking, a lot of hard work, a lot of tension towards the end of sprints. I'm sure you've experienced that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I don't want anyone to listen to this and think, oh God, here's another person saying that you have to be technical to be a very good product manager. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about specifically, especially the domains I've worked in. So, like, payments, and really thinking about all of the stuff around like financial services infrastructure. There's a lot of really technical stuff that you need to try to understand, whether it's is this compliant? Is this scalable? Is it going to be the most efficient way of doing things? What are our customers expecting? How are we going to make money? So where do we need to optimize the most, et cetera, et cetera? So I think it's also organizations need to think about, in the context of what we want product to deliver, what type of people do we need to fulfill these different roles? Because it might be that a specific team might need someone who's maybe got more of a business analyst background, but another team which maybe has a tech lead who is happy to take on some of the responsibilities, like exactly what you were saying, then maybe they don't need someone like that. But it's just also making sure you're balancing all of these different things, and not, it's not a cookie cutting machine, right? Not
Yeah.
everybody has the same experience, so you can't expect the same thing from every single product person, because people come from so many different backgrounds.
Yeah, I completely agree. It depends on the context, right? And the experience within the team. The difficult part is usually people just are maybe bunched together as a team and it just expects, the expectation is there for them to operate as a team. And
Yeah,
I love that you said earlier, right? It takes time to grow a tree, it takes time to grow as a team and to not act as that group of individuals. So then the thing that you actually need is time to get to know each other, right? Time to focus on that collaboration. And then you can probably notice where the gaps are, right? If we do need kind of representation in product discovery phases, in more of a business analyst role, or maybe we do have a tech lead role that can fill that, right? And then you're accommodated for.
exactly. And the thing you have to think about is, if you want the tech lead to do some of this stuff, then make sure that when people are thinking about how much work a team will deliver, that you're not saying this tech lead is going to be focused on coding 100%, because they're not going to be, right?
Yeah.
So it's also making sure that you don't count that person, so that they can actually do that thing that you want them to do properly. But exactly what you're saying, for people to sit down together and talk about, like, hey, these are my strengths, this is an area where I still really need to improve. How can we optimize the way we work to be able to make our team fly? And then also for everyone to think, well, actually, maybe there's some things that I need to learn and understand that will also help me, right? So, for example, I also need to learn a lot about like financial modeling, because that's not my strongest suit. But I'm learning, right? And I'm open about it, that I need to learn. So I like hanging out with accountants, asking them questions like, oh, how does this work? And what does this mean?
Yeah, why not?
Just to familiarize myself with the stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I was, that was actually one of my questions, because as a product owner or product visionary, product manager, you get to jump into a lot of domains. And sure, some domains might be familiar, but I'm expecting that a lot of them are also unfamiliar. Like when you get that role and you're responsible for a product, let's call it a chatbot or it's payments or it's e-com, whatever, how do you familiarize yourself with that domain? Is it just sitting a lot with the stakeholders, or how would you do that?
The first thing I do is just I like learning in an immersive way.
Mm.
Although with German this is not working at all, because this just stresses me
You're immersed.
with my with my German teacher. I'm just like, you can't talk to me in German for an hour, and she's like, but this is how you're going to learn. It's immersive learning. I'm like, no, this doesn't work. But anyways, so what I do is that I like to spend time with the different teams, right? So just figure out like, what are they doing. So maybe going to some of their like planning sessions, or go to the sessions where they are doing their refinement, so that I can at least start to hear all of the different terms, and I start writing. So I've got loads of notebooks, so I just start writing down lots of terms that I'm hearing in these meetings, and then of course spending a lot of time with all of the different stakeholders, and really understanding, okay, what's this domain all about? I really want to learn, I want to understand. So now I'm working in insurance. This is like a whole world for me, like a
That's a
whole
big
different
one.
world.
Yeah.
It's huge, it's super complicated, and it's very nuanced. So, really trying to get myself into it. And, I was really, really lucky that, people in this new company, they're really willing to sit with me for like 2 hours at a time,
Wow.
really going to basics, right? It's like super down to basics. And the thing that I learned really early in my career is that there's nothing like a stupid question. So I ask all the stuff that, before I might have been like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I don't know
Love
that.
that.
But I don't have any shame in just asking the questions. Then, of course, there's reading. There's also a lot that you can get from reading. But also, I shadowed someone in our customer care team who
Mm.
was working on resolving different customer tickets. And he was sitting there so patient, explaining everything to me, like why the customer was contacting, how this insurance claim process works, what to look out for, what they need, the different information, how they get that information, how they make that judgment. And just spending that time shadowing that person. I'm actually going to be doing it on a, I'm planning to do it. Now they're going to hear this and say, "Oh Lord, here she comes." But I'm planning to do this on a monthly basis because, really being that close to the customers is super important, right? When you're working on the future of the product, right? Because you need to understand how are people actually experiencing the product, like, and obviously with insurance, like making a claim is like the hardest part, right? Buying
Yeah.
the policy is not that bad because let's be honest, how many people read the actual policy? But when you need to make a claim, that's when you're like, oh God, like how do I make this claim? So really sort of understanding the process that customers go through, and what better way to do that than to sit with someone who's actually working on that. So I found that to be super, super helpful.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I mean, I know that has helped me in the past from a technical perspective. So when it comes
Yeah,
to the product that you have and the value that you need to add, I can completely understand that that is like you can't go without, right? You need to know what a customer deals with. You need to know what your business representatives deal with on a daily basis, right? Or at least have that monthly check-in that you're gonna have. Yeah, I love
exactly.
that. When it comes to stepping into a new domain, like I love that you say immersing yourself, but that is one thing, right? That is a step in kind of gaining the knowledge that is needed to figure out what value is there or what value you can add. But when it comes to prioritizing, then how do you do that, or how do you take that next step?
Mhm. So, I mean, the most important thing is that I have to understand what does success look like for our company,
Mm.
right? So, what does success look like for our board, our investors? So, what are the things that they want to see us doing that they will say, like, hey, you guys are on track, or you're not on track, or you're exceeding our expectations? And then for me, from a product level, to now start to put things together. So I am the queen. Everyone who's worked with me knows that I'm the queen of putting things into buckets because it's the best way for me to actually think things through. So I
Okay.
have one way of thinking where I bunch things up, whether it's product, people, processes, and technology.
Yeah.
So this is one way that I put everything together, and then I say, okay, I know what are the people concerns, the process concerns, the product concerns, the technology concerns. Uh, Someone might say, "Oh, why aren't you worried about process?" Because actually, a lot of times your processes are actually hurting your product,
Mm.
right? So if your processes are a little bit bumpy or something is not quite working in terms of collaborating, teams collaborating with each other, then actually your output is not going, or outcomes are not going to be as great as you would expect or you would want them to be. So actually, let's fix the process. And then my other buckets are revenue, retention, acquisition, so purely new customers, and then growth, which is, I know people say like, oh, growth and acquisition, but the way I see it is acquisition is every new customer, and then growth is that if you have multiple products on offer, that your customers are using your products as the breadth and depth of use increases. So for me, this is also growth. So I put things into different buckets and then understand like, okay, what's the most important metric that we need to shift right now? Is it like a revenue metric? And then thinking about the products, the people, the process and technology, what are the different things that can affect our revenue that we need to prioritize. And then it becomes a much easier conversation because once you put all these things into buckets, then we're all kind of speaking the same language, right?
Yeah.
And then you can start to have a more reasonable conversation where I can say, Patrick, that sounds more like a retention thing. And we're focusing on revenue. It's not so much a subjective thing like, oh, but I think this, but we're talking about the same thing. And when you have those buckets and you have those ways of actually really putting things very, very separately from each other, I
Yeah.
know there's some gray, like retention can kind of come everywhere, but I do think that this really also helps teams when you're having those discussions. Plus, also when you're communicating the hard decisions. Like, sometimes if we're really focusing on revenue, we might be having a retention issue, but there's nothing we can do about that in a meaningful way for us to make that promise. So we have to be very clear, like, this is what our goal is. is there a way that we can kind of put a band-aid over this retention thing, and then when it really we have the capacity to do it, then we'll do it in a meaningful, proper focus way, rather than sort of kidding ourselves saying, I'm going to do a bit of acquisition, a bit of retention, a
Bit of
bit of
everything.
revenue,
Yeah.
and a bit of growth. Because when you try to do that, the thing that you're going to do is you're going to totally stress out all of the other teams that end up supporting these launches. So, like product marketing and sales and business development, what they need is something chunky, something they can really communicate to be like, hey, we've got this thing, rather than I've got a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah. I love that because from a technology point of view, like stories and a vision is usually broken down in epics. And when we, or when I, let me keep it to myself, I'm working on like 1,000 different things, or at least that's what I'm feeling within a sprint. Like I lose focus of what we're actually delivering at the end of the day. And I think that that is the result of us not focusing on one of the buckets or two of the buckets, or things not being in buckets, which means everything is just kind of blended together in that way. Do you see it in
Oh,
that way as well?
sorry, I lost you for a second.
No, sorry about
Sorry.
that. So I was saying the way you explained the buckets to me, that's kind of a reflection of that in a development team. If I'm working on several epics or if I'm feeling like I'm spread out over several domains, then the conversations is not happening in buckets or they don't exist or we're just taking everything, which means we're kind of doing a little bit of nothing.
Yeah. But I think it's also like this is something that I also challenged the engineers is, if you see a sprint which doesn't have like a coherent story to it,
Yeah.
or you feel like, what, I'm doing this thing, but I just don't feel like it's really going to move the needle, or I actually really don't think this is going to have that much impact. This is where, like, it would be so good to like speak up and ask the question, is this really the thing that we should be working on? And if you know that there are things that actually, if we worked on XYZ, we really could, make a big difference, then that should also come up. So I think it's trying to get all sides to actually come together and really thrash things out. And I think some tension and some disagreement is totally fine
Yeah.
as long as it's done in a respectful way. So I think it's fine to disagree on things. But, I always say like disagree and then commit, right? Once the decision's made and we all push in that direction. But the important thing is that, people are speaking up saying, I've had it before where, I had an engineer who sent me a DM on Slack and
Yeah.
was like, because I had this whole presentation and I thought it was great. And then he was like, man, that did not make any sense to me. Like,
Really?
why are we not focusing on, he was talking about a lot of like things that needed to be sorted out on a technical level.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I was not aware of it. I didn't actually know. And actually, can we sit together and talk about it? And then when he explained it, I was like, oh, okay, gosh, yeah, this is actually really something quite important because I know what's coming in 2 to 3 quarters. And this needs to be done properly first for us to enable us to do those things later. So it was good that that person felt comfortable enough. And I think this is the thing about being approachable, being open, and being quite vulnerable. I also tell my team about things that I've done that are not quite right, or when I've reflected and I've made mistakes. So then they also feel like, okay, I can also tell her that, hey, I'm not happy with XYZ, and
Yeah.
maybe we should be thinking in a different direction.
I like that a lot. I mean, I do it naturally. Maybe it's because I'm stubborn, but I want to be effective as a team, right? And I want to add value. If I feel like
Yeah.
the thing we're working on is only affecting like zero point 0.5 of the customers, while a different slice could affect 20% in a better way, then I'm going to be like, okay, how much customers does this affect? Do we really need this versus the other solutions that we can build?
Yeah.
But I've also seen colleagues and people in the past that love a technology solution. Oh, if you have that problem, we can solve it with this. And I'm like, but do we need to, right? Someone needs to be able to ask that question, do we really need this? Versus being the person that brings the solutions. Because bringing the solutions, I love that as well, right? Don't get me wrong. You solve a thing,
Yeah.
feels good. But it needs to have impact, right? And the right impact and the right value for the company and for the customer. And I think there usually the friction lies as well, or there is where the most discussions lie.
Yeah. This is something that I remember, really early in my career. I had a boss, he was so brilliant. So, we would come up with, this is how we're going to do it. And then he'd be like, why are you making this so complicated? Like, what do you think the business will get or gain by you sort of overcomplicating this? Are you overcomplicating it because you just kind of want to deliver a really complex solution for your own vanity as a team,
Yeah,
or are you actually really focused on what you need to deliver because it doesn't have to be that complex? So he was very good at deconstructing things and then helping us to reconstruct it, but in a way that was, really, really efficient from a capacity perspective. I don't like to use resource because I don't like that word. I think it's we should say capacity.
I agree.
Um, a capacity perspective. So I really took that as a lesson for me as I went on, is having that really healthy, and like you're saying, it is friction, right? Really having that healthy debate, like, okay, if we make it overcomplicated, do we really, really have to do this? Do we really, really have to solve it? Or in the first version of this product that we're delivering, does every single part have to be super slick, or do we need to focus on part 1, 2, and 3, and then let's see how it goes, and then we can do part 4, 5, and 6 once we've got a bit of traction, or we can see that it's really working, etc., etc. So I think kind of having those conversations as a team as well, but making sure you actually come back to do the improvements, because I know that this is where engineering teams also lose trust with product teams.
Yeah.
Is that, we say like, oh no, let's just do the basic version and we'll come back and we'll make it better. And then 2, 3 quarters later, they're talking about the same thing. And then a year down the line, it's like, oh, we want to do this. And then they're like, hello,
Yeah.
remember that thing that we were supposed
Can't
to
do it.
improve? We never came back to it. So this is also where it's about, trust and making sure that as a product team, you're remembering all these things and saying, you know what, we made a commitment that we would improve this thing. Let's not break our commitments. It might be that we have to think about what we have promised that we're going to deliver and come back and say, like, you know what, we have to improve this, which will take capacity away.
Yeah, I agree. I divide it into two problems that we're solving as product teams, I guess: business problems and technology problems. And the more tech that you build up, the more technology problems you're going to have to figure out and solve, basically. And at some point, if you don't give that attention, then your technology problems are so much that your speed of delivery or the value that deliver, either you can't because of the technology problems that you've created, or you're just slower, and then people are going to notice and the output is not going to be the same.
But technology problems are business problems.
Excellent. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's the same. And I think this is the thing, I was telling a friend the other day, I was like, I feel like engineering, they need like a PR team that can like explain things in a way that it's got impact and people really understand it, but not from people who are very non-technical can understand it. Because I think that we have created this thing where we talk about technical debt as if the technical teams have implemented something that they just dreamt up themselves. But a lot of times, where do those shortcuts actually come from? They come from, we've committed a date of delivery, or we've said that we're already going to deliver X number of customers or X number of revenue. So what we need to do is like really shortcut the solution that we're going to deliver and just deliver the shortcuts, right? And a lot of times, the engineering teams, they don't want to do that, but they are like pushed into that corner. So I think that we need to rebrand things and just say like business or organizational debt. Then you can break that organizational business debt. A lot of times there's also problems with processes. There's not always the actual coding. It's not always, I think this is just a piece of the problem, but there's so many other factors that really severely affect that part, which is the actual coding.
Yeah, I think I might adopt that business debt. Yeah. And it's reflected in the code base. Yeah.
Let's start a movement.
I like that a lot, because you're right? The business decisions that we make based on the assumptions that we have, or based on the current point in time and the context that we know, they can change over the future, right? And your code base is always going to reflect the current state. And if your future has changed, then we're adopting future features, then we need to do a cleanup, or we need to adjust for the future knowledge that we've gained. And if that doesn't happen, that is business debt in that way. But we call it tech debt.
Yeah, it really is. So now we've started our movement, Patrick.
We've
started our movement.
I like it a lot.
We don't use technical debt anymore. It's business debt.
I'm gonna pitch it in my team.
Yeah.
One of the final questions I had, and it's because it's a issue or a potential issue I'm struggling with now in my team, is that size is becoming an issue. Right? I love that you pointed out communication is key and getting to know each other, what they want to do, what you can do, and what you can contribute within a team. Knowing that of each other allows you to collaborate better and be more effective as a team instead of a group of individuals. But the bigger the team is, the more time it's going to create. If I'm in a team of 8, I have 7 other people that I need to kind of give attention to or give the same attention to for us to be effective as a team. Have you seen that as well with regards to team size wise? Because I don't have a good solution in there. I think from a managerial point of view, sometimes there's a stigma of let's throw more people in there and then it's just going to fix itself. And then sometimes people split up and they have 2 smaller teams which don't really communicate and you have different problems. But team size is always going to be an issue.
Mhm. So I think, I've been in a team myself where there were 10 of us, 10 of us in a delivery team. I think the most important thing actually was that from a architectural slash domain perspective, we could actually work on this thing as a group of 10. I mean, I wasn't doing hands-on coding, so there were, I think, 8 engineers.
Yeah.
So they were able to do it without stepping on each other, whatever. So I think that's the first thing, to make sure that you can actually work at that size and be efficient. I think that the whole thing about getting to know each other and understanding each other is, it doesn't have to be like this whole like, oh my gosh, we're taking like a whole day out and we're gonna like hang out as a team. But like something I say to all the different teams that I work with is, you have all these regular ceremonies in your diaries. Why don't you just like do it piecemeal? Like just do it iteratively. Maybe on a Friday, make your stand up a little bit longer, where it's a little bit more. Yeah, you do the updates, but then at the end of the week, talk about like, how did the week go for you? Is there anything that we can do a little bit differently? Or once in a while, why don't you make your retro a little bit longer, and have those discussions? But it doesn't always have to be like this. We're taking 10 people out for a whole day.
Yeah.
But you can really sort of take those opportunities when you have that time together. Because I think what tends to happen is, we think that we're being efficient by just focusing on work for that 60 minutes. But then there probably are some underlying issues that,
Yeah.
if you were to resolve those underlying issues, you might not even need 60 minutes. You might build up so much trust with each other that you need 40 minutes. So why don't you just invest that extra 30 minutes every month, maybe, and increase one of your ceremonies and kind of have that discussion? So something that I've seen being done, which I think is so great, which I saw one of the product managers doing, was at the beginning of the quarter, the team has the OKRs, but she specifically took time out with the team once a month. I think she used to extend their planning sessions. So they'd have planning, and then at the end of the planning once a month, they would look at their OKRs and talk about, are we where we want to be?
Yeah.
Is there something going on and we're not quite reaching our goals? She did that off her own back, and I thought that was brilliant, because it's not like she was taking everybody out for like 2 hours to go through all of the OKRs. And what they were doing through the quarter, because I'd been talking to them about this, is slowly start thinking about the next quarter, right?
Yeah.
Slowly start thinking about, is there anything that we really want to put on the radar of the senior leadership team, that we really want to advocate for ourselves as a team? Like, we really want to work on this because of X, Y, Z. And there was a very big feature that they wanted to work on. They did the discovery over a certain amount of time. They got the dependencies ironed out, but they did this over a quarter. And they came with such a slick proposal. There was no way anyone in the leadership team was going to say, nah, guys, you're not ready. Because they were so on point, they were so ready. But they had been building this up over the quarter. So it doesn't always have to be this big bang thing. So every so often she would send me, the materials that they were going to use for the big presentation. And I was like, looking at thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so happy to see. And they were all working on this thing together. So everybody, when they had some time, could kind of pop into the presentation, add their points, blah, blah. But it meant that by the end, they were so coordinated. They were all so invested. They were all super hyper aware of what was going on, that when it came to actually doing the presentation, they were like, oh no, we don't all have to be there. One person can speak for all of us.
Yeah. They crushed it then. That's so cool. And it's a
Yeah.
gradual build up, right? You don't just get like that overnight. You have to give it attention, the attention that it deserves. And that attention takes time and iteration over a longer period of time. Only then can
I
you
think
realize what you actually need to.
it always fascinates me that we expect teams to just work, but
Right?
what relationship in our lives just works from the time we set eyes on each other,
Mhm.
even with our parents or siblings? It's an ever evolving thing, right? It's an investment of time, of energy, of emotion. It's never, there's just this really, I know it's work, but you're not going to set eyes on someone and be like, oh, I like working with Patrick.
I got it. Yeah.
It's not going to be like that. You have to invest in that relationship, right? You have to invest in talking and in understanding each other and being open in a way that everybody feels comfortable, right? Because not everybody feels comfortable with being super vulnerable. But what is your version of comfortable? So I also know what are your boundaries, what do I need to think about, and then to build up that trust. I have a funny story. I was in a meeting and there was a young lady in my team, and she was saying like, oh, she wanted to kind of speak more in meetings and stuff like that because she wanted to build her confidence. And I was like, oh, great, I'll give you as many opportunities as possible.
Yeah.
Uh, and then over 2 or 3 meetings, I would say like, oh, I'm just going to pick someone to speak. And then I picked on her twice. She set up a call with me, and then she said to me, please don't do that.
Oh no.
Please don't pick on me. Please don't pick me as the first person. It makes me really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay,
Good
I
to
get
know.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving me the feedback. And I didn't do it again. But it was just that openness, right? I thought I was doing what she wanted. I thought I was supporting her,
Yeah.
but I was actually making her feel uncomfortable. But she felt comfortable enough to tell me, like, yo, no, that is
Exactly.
not how this doesn't work. Um, and yeah, and it's about trust because, it's not like I said to her, oh, I'm trying to support you. And now you're telling me, I said to her, fair enough.
Yeah,
And I
gotcha.
apologize if I made you feel uncomfortable. And I really sort of took that as really good feedback.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's so cool that you have that environment that she can come to you and be like, no, 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 this is not what I meant. Right? Because if that safety is not there, it's gonna be behind your back to other colleagues. Or Chiedza always calls me out first, and like I don't like it, it makes me nervous, and you don't want any of that.
Yeah, and the next thing she's just like, maybe she would, if she'd never said it, she'd just start trying to like avoid me,
Yeah.
or that resentment starts to build up. She doesn't trust me. So yeah, once we got that out the door, I was like, okay, cool. Like, thank you for letting me know. And you know what? I'm not sitting here like, oh yeah, I've always been like this. I haven't. Because when I first became a manager, I would have taken that as such an offense.
Okay.
I'd have been super upset and super wound up by it. But then it's really about realizing that no, Chiedza, it's not actually about you.
Yeah.
It's about that other person. And this is the core of leadership is it really stops being about you. It really is not about you.
Yeah.
It's about everybody else who's around you.
Yeah. I love that. That had to sink in for me, but I completely agree with what you said. I've had a blast talking about all things product ownership, your history and your take on things as well. I love your take. Like, I think in my past, if a lot of people, if a lot of even developers or product owners or teams adopted your thoughts, I think things would have been a lot smoother. So I hope a lot of people can learn from this. Is there anything that's still missing or any advice you'd still like to share?
Ooh, anything missing? I think the thing that I do want to say is that I would hate for anyone to listen to this and feel like, oh yeah, she's like saying that you have to be technical to be great in product, because you don't have to be. I think what's important is that from an organizational level, you're set up for success, right? So you're set up for success. If it's a very like technical thing, that you have someone who is your partner who can support you with that. So, I think for a lot of people, it's really understanding that, a lot of your success is down to your environment. So really constantly thinking about like, is this the optimal environment for me? And if you don't feel like it is, you should try to address it and try to speak up. It's really important, because a lot of times, sometimes as leaders, we get very lost in stuff, and, we think we're being helpful, we think we're being effective, but without that sort of 360 feedback loop, we can get a little bit lost, and we can sometimes lose sight of things, and, we don't know everything. We
Yeah,
definitely don't know everything, and we make mistakes every single day. So just keep us aware, and keep challenging us, and yeah, to be better leaders.
beautiful. Yeah, I completely agree. Cool. I'm gonna round it off there. Chiedza, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank
It was a
you.
lot of
Thank
fun.
you so much. You've inspired me, by the way,
Really?
to get like a super nice setting so I can record like nice podcasts. I love your
I'm very
setting.
lucky with this. Cool. I'm gonna round it off here then. Chiedza
Yeah.
Muguti,
Thank you.
everyone. I'm gonna put all her socials in the description below. Check her out. Let her know you came from our show. And with that being said, thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next one.